Many of us have to take an audition at some point in our musical journey, whether it be to get into some sort of ensemble, whether it be an honor ensemble or an ensemble at your school or in your community, or whether it be to participate in a camp or a music festival, or even to get into a college music program. Auditions are just a necessary part of being involved in music, whether we like it or not. As someone who has taken dozens of auditions, I know exactly how stressful it can be to prepare for them. And I've picked up a few tips along the way that have helped me perform better at auditions and even win several auditions as well. So in this video, I want to give you a step-by-step process of how to approach and prepare for any type of audition, whether it be a live audition or it be some sort of recorded audition, a step-by-step process of how you should approach planning for it, and some general advice on how to perform your best and be successful at the audition. If this is the first time we're meeting, my name is Dr. Natalie Law, and I'm a professional bassoonist and teacher, and I love helping people like you learn how to play the bassoon, improve your skills, and just become confident playing this instrument. So if that's a topic of interest to you and you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and give me a thumbs up if the video is helpful for you. And I'd love to hear any questions or comments that you have on this topic of auditions or really anything about bassoon playing. So let's start at the very beginning, the very first step in preparing for an audition. When you find out that there is an audition coming up that you want to take, the very first thing you should do is mark it in your calendar, the audition date, or if it's a recorded audition, mark in your calendar when you're going to have that recording session. And there might be some sort of paper application along with the audition. You know, sometimes there's a paper application that's due maybe several weeks prior to the audition itself. Make sure that you have all those deadlines and materials, you know, in your calendar, in your planner, however you plan things out for yourself so that you know exactly when things are happening and exactly when things need to be done. When it comes to a recorded audition, you have a little bit of flexibility of when you can actually have the recording session, but treat that recording session like a live audition. Treat it very seriously, decide exactly when it's happening, and there's some other planning and preparation that goes into that as well. You want to make sure that you're recording in the best sounding location that you possibly have access to. You might be lucky and have access to a school or some sort of performance facility where there's an actual hall, even if it's just a small performance hall, where the hall has good resonance, it sounds good to play. You generally don't want to record in a super dry, carpeted, small room, because the sound quality is going to not be quite as resonant and rich and full as we want it to be. So you want to get in the best possible venue you can, and you want to reserve that in advance, because if you can get into a good venue, it might even be something like a church where they have a sanctuary that has a pretty good performance space. You want to reserve that in advance as quickly as possible. When it comes to recording, if you can hire someone to record you who has their own equipment and has lots of experience in recording, you probably want to go that route, and you want to make sure that that person is available during your scheduled recording time. Now, if you're a student and you're recording for, maybe all state or all region ensembles, you might have a teacher who has access to good equipment and is very experienced in recording for it and knows exactly where you should record and all that stuff. But in general, it's helpful to have somebody there to record you, even if you're using your own equipment and you have a friend who's just pressing record. It makes things a little bit easier to have someone to help you out. When you're planning this audition, make sure that you read all of the details carefully, all of the eligibility requirements, all of the materials that you need. Make sure that you have access to all the music. A lot of auditions will provide you actual music to prepare. Some auditions will say you need to have a 2-minute solo, and in that case you have to figure out your own solo that you're playing. It's really standard if you're at a really high level, maybe you're preparing for a college audition or even a professional audition. It's really common and sort of expected to use the Mozart Bassoon Concerto, the exposition of the first movement. A lot of times if an audition asks for a solo of your choice, a lot of people will still play the Mozart because it's expected, everybody knows it. It's kind of a good place to start when it comes to a solo. You don't necessarily want to choose, a super unknown piece, even if you may be really good at it and really like it. You want to choose something that the judges would know and be able to judge you by. Now, that is for higher level auditions. I know many of you are students or you play bassoon as a hobby. So playing the Mozart Bassoon Concerto is not something that's necessary for the auditions you're doing. So in that case, if you have to come up with a solo of your choice, if you've played a solo within the past year or two, that's relatively easy to put together and, you feel like it really shows, you as a player, then use that. Use something you've played before. I wouldn't necessarily learn a solo from scratch just for an audition. You want to use something that you have some experience playing. Now, sometimes, especially for some school auditions, you don't necessarily have to have a bassoon solo per se. You could use an excerpt from some sort of etude from maybe the 50 Weissenborn studies or Mildy studies or whatnot. If you're working with a teacher, they can often kind of guide you in what would be a good etude to play if you need to come up with some sort of more soloistic piece of your own choice. If you need to acquire certain music, if you need to buy a book to be able to have access to the music, make sure you do that right at the beginning when you find out about the audition. Make sure that you know exactly where you start and end for each excerpt of the audition. A lot of times you're not playing complete pieces. You're only going to play a couple lines of a piece of music. Usually they're pretty clear about where you start and end, but sometimes they're not. So if it's unclear what the audition requirements are, don't be afraid to reach out to the organization or ensemble or whoever is running the audition to clarify what you're actually expected to play. This is especially important if you're submitting a recorded audition, because there are often very strict requirements about audio and video recording, and it can vary from audition to audition. Some auditions will require you to record one take of all of the different materials in the audition from start to finish without any stops. And in that case, that's going to change how you prepare for the audition, because if you know that you don't have like a break in between each piece for different takes, you're going to have to practice transitioning from different pieces, and that's going to be more difficult. So that's going to change how you're preparing for the audition. Some auditions will allow you to do a track for each piece of the audition, and in that case you can take multiple takes and you can take a break in between each one. So that makes it a little bit easier. So just make sure you're really clear on what those recording requirements are. And sometimes they're really picky about when the camera's on you, it has to be a full body and include the full instrument, has to be a certain distance away, has to be in a certain type of venue. So just really be aware of all of those requirements if they have them. So after you've marked the audition date on your calendar and you've read all the details and figured out everything you need, reserved anything, if you have to travel for the audition, you've made your travel arrangements, you've done all that planning for the end result. Now you want to work backwards in your planning. So the week of the audition, you want to make sure you avoid scheduling any big events or big appointments or vacations or anything like that. You want to try and keep that week and those days leading up to the audition as open as possible, because it may seem a little bit overkill, but you really need your mental and physical rest and energy to do well at the audition. And you want to go into it as your best self. You don't want to go into it tired or stressed about other things. You want to just be as prepared as possible. So avoid scheduling things on that week. And the week leading up to that audition, you want to be performance ready. So you want to hit what we might call your peak playing ability about a week or a few days before the audition itself. And what I mean by that is you want to be at the absolute best of your playing ability a few days prior to the audition where all of the excerpts sound great, you're ready to perform them, you're meeting all of the tempo requirements, and you've got all the details worked out, and you've done all of the preparation work. You want to be at that peak prior to the audition. And the reason for that is, at that point, you're kind of at the edge of your playing ability. You want a few days to kind of sit on that peak and kind of become even more comfortable with the rep, because by the time you hit the audition, whether it's a live audition or a recorded audition, you are going to be nervous, and that's going to affect your playing ability. And so you want to have not only hit your peak, but be comfortable by that point. You want to be as comfortable and confident as possible once the audition comes. That can be really hard to sort of time the peak of your playing ability, but that's where you want to be in that week leading up to the audition. The week prior to the audition is important too. That's where you want to be on the cusp of performance ready. Maybe you have everything just about performance ready, but there's just a couple small details that you're working out still. Maybe a tempo for a piece is supposed to be at quarter note equals 120, and you have it at 116. That's okay, if you're, more than a week prior to the audition, because it's not going to take too much to bump it up a few more clicks. Now, if you're only at quarter note equals 100, 2 weeks prior to the audition, it's going to be a lot more difficult to overcome that 20 clicks than it is just a few clicks. So you want to be kind of on the cusp of performance ready. That's the goal. Now, I'm saying this is sort of the ideal world. A lot of us, especially if you're a student or you're, play bassoon as sort of a hobby and you're just trying to get into a community ensemble or camp or something like that, there may be some materials on the audition list that are just a little bit above your ability level. In fact, it's really common. I work with a lot of students where the audition rep, it's a little bit above where they're comfortable playing. It's not that they can't necessarily do it. It's just to be able to do it in an audition really well can be daunting. So one thing to keep in mind here is, what I've just talked about, that's the ideal. That's what you're aiming for. And you want to have those goals. You want to have something to work towards. But keep in mind, especially when it comes to tempo, it's really important that you only play the excerpts as fast as you can play them absolutely perfectly. If an excerpt is supposed to be at quarter note equals 120 and the best that you can play it, perfectly is at 100, is at quarter note equals 100, play it at quarter note equals 100, because I guarantee the people who are judging your audition, they would so much rather that excerpt be clean and clear and beautiful, and that you're paying attention to all of the other markings in the music, than have you sort of stumble through it at 120 and it be rough and unmusical and you're obviously stressed. So especially when it comes to tempo, do the best that you can do. You want to sound as good as you possibly can. You don't want to try and hit above your weight class, so to speak. Stick where you are and be confident about it. I have so many students who I tell this to and they're kind of like, oh yeah. When I am the person listening to someone auditioning, I want them to do well. And when I hear them confidently and intentionally playing something that's supposed to be played faster, but I hear them playing it at a slower tempo, but it's beautiful and it's well prepared and it's very put together and polished, but just at a slower tempo than what's written, that is such a mature thing for me to hear, because I hear they have made that intentional choice to be there, and I know how hard it is to want to play it faster than we can actually play it, but they're playing it beautifully at the slower tempo. That is so much more important than the tempo itself, and many teachers will tell you that. But when it comes to auditions, if you just aren't able to play that tempo, play a slower tempo, but play it really well. The 2 weeks prior to the audition, you want to be on the cusp of performance level. That's also a good week to schedule mock auditions, and you don't want your actual audition to be the first time that you're auditioning. You want to have several mock auditions for teachers or friends or just people who can give you feedback and kind of put you on the spot. And so you can practice the process of auditioning, because we so often get kind of stuck in a practice mindset and we don't shift ourselves into that performance mindset early enough. And then by the time the audition comes, we haven't practiced auditioning enough. You want to schedule mock auditions, even if it's just kind of informal, just having somebody sort of listening to your excerpts. It can make a big difference, and they might have some insightful feedback that you didn't think about. When it comes to recording these days, there is a really high expectation that audio and video quality be really good. So technically you can record a recorded audition on a smartphone, and you can get halfway decent video and halfway decent audio. I know the technology these days is, you can get by with that. But I encourage you to get the best equipment you can possibly get. Now, if you can hire someone out to record you with their equipment, then do that. Or if you have to use your own equipment, see if you can borrow a good camera or at least a good mic. A good mic is more important than a good camera, but if you have both, that's even better. And research how to set them up, because you don't want to be getting to the audition only to find out that you don't know how to use your equipment, and then your audition suffers because you can't even record it well. So really invest in that recording equipment, whether it be investing in someone to professionally record you or just investing in a little bit better equipment than your smartphone. It's going to make a big difference, and it makes a big difference to the judges hearing you when your recording sticks out in a good way because you have a little bit higher quality than your competitors. That makes a big difference when it comes to recordings. So the weeks prior to the last 2 weeks before an audition are all about your preparation. And this can vary depending on how much time you have to prepare. If you have 6 months to prepare, your preparation strategy is going to look different. If you have 2 weeks or 3 weeks to prepare, your strategy is going to look very different. I have found in my own audition experience that when I have 4 to 6 weeks of preparation time, that's kind of a sweet spot to give me enough time to really work on the audition material, especially if it's stuff that maybe I haven't played before or it's more difficult and I have to work it back up. That gives me plenty of time to work on it, but I also don't get burnt out on it, because like I mentioned before, you want to hit your peak a few days to a week prior to the audition date. And so you don't want to hit your peak of your playing 3 weeks before the audition date, because you're going to get diminishing returns. It's really hard to maintain that high level intensity for multiple weeks. So trying to time that peak is so important. And so if you know of an audition coming up in 6 months, then yes, you might start working on the material kind of casually, at that time, but you're really going to focus your most intense practicing, the 4 to 6 weeks prior to the audition, depending on the difficulty. Of course, if the music is really difficult for you, get started on it early, so that it's not stressing you out. But the most intense preparation, again, 4 to 6 weeks. I've talked a lot about the last 2 weeks prior to the audition, but those weeks leading up to those last 2 weeks, make some mini milestones and goals for yourself to sort of motivate yourself and help keep yourself on track. So if tempo is an issue for one of the pieces, like just being able to play it fast enough, set yourself like a mini goal. You're gonna hit 10 clicks below the performance tempo, 3 weeks prior to the audition, and then you're going to slowly work it up from there. That's a good way to make the audition process a little bit less overwhelming, so that you can sort of manage it in bite-sized chunks, and do this with all aspects of the preparation process. If there's something that's difficult about the audition material, break it down into smaller chunks and make those into goals leading up to those last kind of 2 weeks prior to the audition. So when it comes to that actual preparation, when you're in the weeds practicing, working on that material, There's a couple things that I have found to be helpful in my own practicing when I'm preparing for an audition. I have found it really helpful to run the entire audition list every single day. From the very beginning, when I first start working on the materials for that audition, one of the first things that I do is I do like a mock audition with myself. And I basically have a mock audition every single day that I'm practicing. What'll happen is I'll do my warm-up routine, and if you watched any of my videos about practicing, you'll know that I put a lot of stock into my warm-up routine, and by the end of my warm-up routine, I'm ready to play anything. So I'll link that video up above if you want to learn more about my warm-up routine. But I do my warm-up, and then the very next thing that I do when I'm prepping for an audition is I do a mock audition. And I run through all of the excerpts in the audition. And what I do is I'll use, there's online tools where you can enter a list of names of the pieces, and then it'll randomize those names. And then, or you can do the thing where you write everything on pieces of paper, and then you draw them out, and then that's your order, the order that you drew the names in, that's the order that you're going to run the audition in. It's important to not always just, start with the same thing and go through the same order of the list. You want to randomize your order, because especially if you have to do everything in one take, or if you're doing a live audition, you may not know the order of the pieces. So kind of randomize that a little bit, and it kind of changes things up. What I do when I'm doing that run through of all the audition pieces is I don't stop. Even if the music is a complete mess, maybe it's a new, piece of material that I've never played before and I really need a lot of time to work on it, I will still audition when I'm running through that list, because it's so important to get yourself into a performance mindset. I can't stress enough how easy it is for us as musicians to get into a practice mindset, and we don't practice performing enough. Of course, actually performing it a lot is a good thing to practice, but within your practice, getting into performance mindset where you can't stop, even if there's a giant mistake, it's so important to practice that mindset from the very beginning. So I run all of the material right at the beginning of my practice session, and I record myself. And then I immediately listen back to my recording and hear everything. And of course, sometimes it's cringeworthy, because I truly need to work on a lot of that material. But I make myself listen to it, because you always hear things differently when you record. And you can, when you're just recording in your practice session, just use the voice recorder app on your phone. It doesn't have to be a good recording setup, just something to record yourself. When I'm listening to that recording, I will also take a tuner and a metronome. I will hold it up to the recording device, and I will see, where was my pitch when I was performing this? Oh, it's a little sharp in there. So I'm going to make a note to myself to bring that down, because I know that I'm going to 10 sharp when I'm performing that. And I turn, if it's something that's, got to be a strict tempo, which a lot of things are, I turn the metronome on with the recording. Oh, I was rushing in that measure. Oh, I was dragging in that measure. Using the tuner and the metronome with the recording that you just made of that sort of mock audition, it's so enlightening. And you save yourself hours of practice by just listening back and being a critical listener of your music. So after I've done the audition, I've listened back to it with the tuner and the metronome, I've made notes in my music based on that recording, then I decide, I pick 2 or 3 excerpts or main parts of the material to focus on for that day. I can't possibly spend all of my practice time practicing all of the excerpts every single day, but there's like 2 or 3 that I pick to focus on for the day, and that's where I dive in, I get into the weeds, I do my really slow practicing. If it's something that's really technically difficult, I'll change up the rhythms, I'll change up the articulations. I'll do all sorts of things, to really break the excerpt down. And that's where the hard, intense practicing comes into play. And then I will set those excerpts down for that day. I do the exact same thing the next day. I have my warm-up, I do my mock audition of my randomized order of excerpts. I listen back with the tuner and metronome. I cringe a lot and make some notes. And then I focus on 2 or 3 other excerpts that are different than the previous day. So I'm focusing on different things each day. There are some things that I focus on every single day, especially if it's really technical and it's kind of hard to get it up to speed. I will practice that every single day regardless. So for me, an example of this, in the orchestral audition world, on almost every single orchestral audition ever, you have to play an excerpt from The Marriage of Figaro. That particular excerpt can be difficult because you've got rapid tonguing in there. A lot of people double tongue. For me, I actually single tongue that section because it works better. But the caveat of that is that I have to keep my single tongue very fast. I can't go 2 weeks without really playing that excerpt and expect to be able to play it at tempo, my tongue moving that rapidly. So that's an example where, and there's some other, technical elements of Figaro that they need to be absolutely precise, absolutely clean. Everybody knows the excerpt. And so that's one of the ones that I kind of work on every day. And I do different things with the excerpt every day, but I work on it every day because I know it's one of those ones that's just going to keep coming back to haunt me if I don't keep it up. So there might be that for you as well. Again, it totally depends on the audition. That example I gave you, that's like a professional orchestral example, but the idea applies no matter what level or what type of audition you're playing. A way to help keep track of all these, excerpts, pieces that you're playing for your audition is to keep a practice log. I'll link down to a practice log that I use pretty regularly. That's a good way to notate what tempos you're getting things up to, what things you need to work on, a way to be really nitpicky with yourself. And then you don't have to kind of keep track of all the little details day to day. You just write it down, and the next day you just take off where you left off. I want to talk a little bit about the day of the audition or the day of the recording session where you're doing the audition. So this is a really important day, obviously. And at this point, if you've been kind of following my tips for preparation, you've put an immense amount of work into preparing for it. And so it can be very overwhelming and stressful once you get to that day. But there are some things to kind of keep yourself in check and give yourself the best chances for success. Make sure that you get plenty of sleep the night before. It's just like if you have like a sports tournament or a match or some big thing going on, you want to get rest the night before. And then you want to be drinking plenty of water, keep yourself well hydrated, because playing bassoon or playing any instrument is a very physical thing. You want to keep the circulation in your body working well so that your fingers move correctly. If you're like me, when you get nervous, I lose circulation in my hands. My hands get cold and clammy, and drinking water sort of helps that particular issue. And it's just good to stay hydrated in general. So make sure you're well hydrated on the day of the audition. On the day of the audition, and really the day before too, you don't want to burn out your lips. You don't want to have an intense 4-hour practice session the day before your audition because you're going to be a little bit sore on the day of the audition. You want to keep your practicing, you want to practice and you want to be efficient and focused about it. But you want to really keep in mind your physical self. You want to be in your best physical condition. So the day prior, just have a really light practice session, focus on some of your trouble spots, but don't overdo it. Because at that point, couple days before the audition, there is absolutely nothing you can do to change any major things in your playing. At that point, like I said, you want to be at your peak and you want to just try your best to perform at your peak in the audition. That's all you can do. You're not going to make any big revelations or changes the day or a few days before. On the day of the audition, all you want to do is have a good warm-up a session prior to the audition, and you want to try and time your warm up so that it's as close to the audition as possible, and then you don't have a lot of time to sit cold and still prior to actually playing. So do your best to try and time that out. And like I said, I talk about my warm-up routine a lot. And again, I'd recommend checking out my warm-up video if you want to hear more about it. But for me, I use that warm-up routine. It's a way that it just gets me completely ready to do anything. By the time I'm done with that warm-up routine, I'm not only physically warmed up and my instruments warmed up, but I'm mentally warmed up. I've done all of my fundamental exercises on the bassoon, and I literally feel like I can play anything after my warm-up routine. And I think that's really important. And then I know when I come to a situation like an audition or a performance, all I have to do the day of is do my warm-up routine, and then I know my lips aren't burnt out, but I'm warmed up enough and ready to play. So get your good warm-up routine in as close to the audition as possible, and then play the audition. One thing that I haven't touched on too much in this video, because it's kind of a whole other topic in itself, is about nerves or performance anxiety. Raise your hand if you have dealt with performance anxiety before. If you didn't raise your hand, I'm not sure if you're human or not, because all of us, I think, at some point or another deal with some type of performance anxiety. Some of us more than others. Some of us have different sort of symptoms of it and deal with it differently. But I think all of us, all of us come across performance anxiety at some point. And that's something that I could do a whole other video about. If that's a topic that's of interest to you, comment down below and I'll plan something out, just focusing on performance anxiety. But I'll give you a couple tips right now because it's so related to auditioning. Remember that the judges or the people who are listening to your audition tape, they want you to do well and they want to hear good music, because if it's an ensemble that you're joining, they want somebody who's going to bring something really beautiful to their ensemble. They want to hear really good things. They're not waiting for you to mess up. Everybody wants you to do well. So it's not like, somebody's sitting there with a giant red pen and marking all of these horrible things about you. They want you to do well. And I find that the best way to combat my performance anxiety is in my preparation. When I feel really well prepared, like I have done everything possible, I have left nothing out. I've put it all on the table. I'm putting my best foot forward. I'm doing literally everything I can to have a good audition. That is when I feel the least nervous. So that's when I'm like, yep, I can confidently do this. I'm doing the best that I can, and that's what I've got. And I play that way. If I feel like I didn't prepare as well as I could have, or if I start doubting myself, that's when I really get anxious, because I'm like, why am I here? What am I doing? I didn't do this. So, I kind of think about that as I'm preparing for the audition. Like, I don't want to get to the audition and think, oh my gosh, I should have prepared better. That's the worst feeling. So as you're preparing for the audition, really have in your mind, like, I want to get there. I want to get to that audition day and just blow them out of the water. And I don't want to have any doubts that I didn't put, my best foot forward. That's kind of the mindset you have to have. And it's a little intense, I will admit, especially, if you're a student or a hobbyist bassoonist, you're not entrenched in this audition world like I am. But, if you want to win an audition, especially if it's very competitive, you have to have that kind of mindset. You just have to have it. I wish there was a way around it, but you have to have kind of an intense preparation mindset. For me, that's really helped my performance anxiety. And in general, you want to fake it until you make it. I think that's actually a really true statement. Even if you don't feel confident on the inside, you want to pretend like you're confident on the outside. And a lot of times when you're pretending to be confident, meaning you're pretending to play really confidently and you're pretending to be this amazing player, a lot of times pretending forces you to actually play better, or it forces you to actually play your best. So really, even if you don't feel confident, act confident, play confidently. If you make a big mistake on accident, own it. There's going to be mistakes that happen in your audition. they might be big or small, but they're not going to be planned. No amount of preparation is going to stop some sort of mishap from happening, right? So just know that there's going to be mistakes. Things aren't going to happen as planned, and don't dwell on those mistakes when they do happen. I have a lot of students who, when they make a big mistake in a performance or an audition, they want to roll their eyes, or they kind of internally focus on that mistake that happened a few seconds ago, and then it draws their attention from what they're actually playing. Do your best to just let it go. Yep, there was a big mistake, but listen to all this other amazing music that I'm playing, just confidently own it. It's going to happen, and it's okay if it does. It's not the end of the world. We're not, performing life-altering surgery on someone. It's music, it's supposed to be enjoyable and entertaining and, beautiful. It's not supposed to be like daunting or life-threatening. I want to talk a little bit about what you should do immediately after the audition. So at this point, you will probably feel an immense amount of relief when it's done, because you've had all of this buildup for weeks or possibly months to this audition, and then it's all of a sudden over in a few minutes, and then you just feel a rush of relief, that's a nice feeling to have. But you should also just keep yourself engaged for a little bit longer and journal about what just happened. So literally, I have found this helpful in my last few auditions, that when I even just take my notes app on my phone and within a half hour of the audition, I sit down and I type out what I was feeling, how it went, what excerpts went well, what didn't, all of these things, as much detail as possible, how I felt and how it went, because we don't audition enough or go through that audition process enough to really remember what it felt like. But once you're in that audition process, you feel things that you don't normally feel on a daily basis. And I have found it helpful that when I've reviewed previous journals of auditions, when I'm going to take a future audition, I will sometimes go back to my little journal. It could be just like a paragraph in the notes app on your phone. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. And I'll go, oh yeah, that happened. So how can I avoid that happening again in the future? I was doing fine up until this point, and then I got really nervous. What can I do when I get to that point to not get nervous? Or whatever it may be, maybe this excerpt, I worked on this excerpt and worked on all these things, and then this dumb mistake happened. Okay, well, the next time that I play that, I'm really going to avoid that mistake, right? So journal, even if you're not someone who really journals, I really think it's a good process to go and do immediately after the audition, just to kind of know how it went. And then you can review it next time you go to prepare for an audition. And you remind yourself, oh yeah, that happened, that I had that feeling. It can be really illuminating, just writing down your process. But most importantly, allow yourself time to decompress and process what happened, Give yourself time to relax, maybe put the instrument down for a few days after the audition if you can, and just give yourself a break, because you've worked so hard to get to this audition, especially if you've been following these tips that I've given you. You've worked so hard to get to this point, and you don't want to just forget that it happened. You really want to give yourself a pat on the back, even if the audition doesn't go the way that you want it to, the results don't come in the way that you want them to. You should still be proud of yourself for working hard, because there's a lot of things that you learn and gain from the audition process, even if you don't win the audition. Be gracious for the opportunity to participate in the audition, because even if you didn't win, you learned something from it. I guarantee you got better at your instrument. It forced you to hone in on some things that other performance scenarios don't really force you to focus on. And you probably got a lot out of it, even if it doesn't feel like it. If you did win the audition, fantastic. That's awesome. Also, but just know that, especially the higher the level you get into music, if you're maybe a high schooler, competing on more of an advanced level, or if you're getting into college level playing, just know that auditions are incredibly competitive. That's one of the things, I talked about in one of my videos previously about, what it's like to be a professional musician. Auditions are just so difficult to deal with because they're so competitive the higher the level you get into. A lot of times the committee has a hard time deciding who to advance and who to choose as the winner of the audition. And sometimes they're splitting hairs. Or sometimes maybe you had a really good audition, but the committee just they didn't like the expressive choice that you made in something, or they don't like your tone on your instrument as much as they like the tone of someone else because they feel like their tone might fit better in the group. They're thinking about, what are their motives for bringing you into that ensemble or festival or whatever it may be. So even if you played incredibly, there may just be something about your audition or something about your playing that the committee felt, yeah, they were good, but it's not quite what we were looking for. But overall, auditions can be learning experiences. They can teach you a lot about yourself, your organization, your work ethic, your, everything about, you as a musician. They can teach you a lot. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give me a like, comment any questions down below. If you've participated in auditions before, what has helped you? Certainly everything I've mentioned in this video isn't a complete list. There's certainly other aspects of auditioning that, help certain people and whatnot. So I'd love to hear your experience with auditions and, your thoughts.